Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the Dead Space remake on the Steam Deck, thanks to EA for providing a code of the game. So I'm going to be on native resolution without VSync, because the system already employs that for you. No film grain, no motion blur, no dynamic resolution, because it's pretty inconsistent, although I think at this resolution you might want to enable it in some locations. Variable rate shading on to increase performance in general, because sometimes I see a few drops. It used to be a separate option, now you have it here. And at this resolution with FSR quality, I recommend you enable it. Then on graphics, we're basically in a mix between medium and low. I lowered the shadow quality and the volumetric resolution. I think you can increase this a tiny bit, but at this resolution, I recommend you keep it as is. I'm going to show you two resolutions for 30 FPS. So let's go like this with a 30 FPS cap. And in this location is one of the ones that I had the worst drops in general, because there's more shadows and volumetrics. And there's two ways to play this game on PC. One of them is the Steam version, what I'm playing right here, and the other one is using the EA Play Pro subscription, which is basically Origin, that is now called EA Desktop App. And you can use that version as well on the Steam Deck, but it has a few disadvantages. Apart from having to install it separately, you're going to have major stutter because there's no shader pre-compilation like on the Steam version. Valve pre-compiles some shaders, installs them on their own when you download the game on Steam, and the game is basically almost stutter-free. With the EA version installed separately, you cannot do that. So that's why on the Steam Deck, the only way to play it properly is using the Steam version, unfortunately. Again, because of the pre-compiled shaders by Valve. And they fixed it pretty quickly. It also crashed when opening the map. That's no longer an issue with Proton hotfix. It's enabled by default for this game. And this is one of the sections, again, when I drop frames when attacking enemies. I guess it's because of the lighting. It's pretty complex in this location. There we go. And especially while using the rifle. There's a few transparencies going on when I use the rifle, so like this. So sometimes you're going to see drops into the upper 20s, but I think this is the best way to play the game on Steam Deck. Again, minor drops into the upper 20s, and you get a great visual experience. You got the good lighting, the good shadows. Volumetrics are not perfect, but otherwise it's pretty good. I think we're CPU bound in scenarios like this due to the light on how it moves. As you can see, those drops there. The GPU clock will increase, but the CPU seems to be the limiting factor in general, because it has to balance the GPU clock with the CPU clock. As one increases, the other one decreases. So yeah, let me show you the best settings, the second best settings in my opinion. So if you want a sharper image, because when you use FSR, some of the menu looks weird, my advice is to go down to a lower resolution. Instead of 800p, you can do 600p, which again on the Steam Deck screen looks pretty good. And that also means that you can use the system-wide FSR, which is this one. You can add as much or as little sharpness as you want. Personally, I like in this game to keep it on 1. Then variable rate shading, I disable it. FSR, I also disable it. And you can use the same settings. So the menu will look a little bit weird because of the low resolution. But again, you can lower the sharpness even further. As you can see there, it changes a little bit. 1 or 0, basically. So it's native 600p instead of 800p, which is similar to the quality FSR that we used before. So yeah, those are the settings. 600p, still looks pretty good on the Steam Deck screen. I don't know why it stutters on the menu. Let it load a little bit further. And if it drops too much for you, consider using FSR quality at this resolution as well. It's going to be a lower internal resolution, but it should still be a playable experience. But at this resolution, I think it's perfect. It doesn't have the inconsistent look of FSR in this game. Oh my god, I'm terrible with the joystick. Again, you can control the sharpness, which on native resolution you cannot. And you get visually a more consistent image because we're not using the upscaler on FSR 2.0, which again still looks good, but I think this looks better just because we get the sharpness, the system-wide sharpness option. And again, these drops in this scene in particular is mostly CPU limitation, and when the CPU is doing a lot of work, the GPU clock will decrease. So you got some sections that it is like that, unfortunately. It's how the game works. Too many lights. And lowering the settings, I didn't notice much of a difference in this particular area. So yeah, I think the best settings for 30 is something like this. So again, here the GPU and the CPU are fighting for core clock. Very complex scene with the lighting and all that, plus the flashlight. Although here, now that I think about it a little bit better, in this scene in particular, maybe you can use quality FSR, but you're going to sacrifice image quality once more. So yeah, with 3 enemies plus my liked, plus the liked of the scene, might be a little bit too much. And let's see if it stays at 30 this time around. He has to stabilize, unfortunately. Give it a few seconds. There we go. And as you can see, we're still into the mid-20s in this part. So again, that's a CPU limitation, because the CPU and the GPU share the clock speed. If one increases, the other one decreases. But once the lighting is fixed, and by fixed I mean less demanding, because there was a light that was moving, plus the enemies, plus the flashlight, FSR at that point is not necessary. I mean, even when I enabled it, it was still dropping below 30. Again, that's a CPU limitation, unfortunately. Anyway, let's keep on moving. So some areas of the game have that issue. Decreasing the settings doesn't help. Maybe in the future, if there's new patches or something by Valve, we can get a better experience, but I think this is the best way to play the game at this point. Some drops into the mid-20s when there is more than 3 enemies plus complex lighting. And let me reload one of the previous saves so we have other places to test. I have one on the first minutes of the game. And as you can see, I don't know why the menu drops frames. When I pause the game, it drops to 15 FPS, which is kind of weird. But otherwise, the game is pretty smooth most of the time. There's some areas, again, when it drops further. But on the Steam Deck screen, at least with these settings, it looks pretty good. It's a 7-inch screen. So if you're looking at it on a big monitor, it's going to look blurry. Well, that's why. Okay. So this is one of the early areas of the game. As you can see now, the GPU and CPU are not being pushed all that much because these areas are less demanding. There's less lights in the scene in comparison to what I showed you at the beginning. Same happens on the very first part of the game, when you are on the spaceship, getting to the Ishimura for the first time. You're just sitting around, not doing much, and you're going to drop frames. It's a very complex scene. But most of the time it should be like I'm showing you right now. So you have again 2 options for 30 FPS. Either native resolution with quality FSR, variable rate shading, and a mix between medium and low, or the same settings at 600p. That is a slightly lower resolution, really. On the Steam Deck screen, at least, is not bad. And the thing with that is that you can tweak the sharpness of the image. That's the main advantage in my opinion. You can crank it up and it's super sharp. It has some artifacting. But if you keep it on 1, 0 or 2, I think it looks pretty good. So yeah, most of the time it's okay, but there's some heavy areas where it's not that pleasant. So let's keep going. And well, since we're CPU limited, do not expect a 30 FPS target or a 6 FPS mode or 40 FPS. Unfortunately, the CPU is not enough for that. I'm going to show you that in a moment. But in the meantime, let me unlock the frame rate just to show you how it goes. Not really a good idea, in my opinion, because it's going to be very inconsistent. Some areas are going to be 40 to 60, then you're going to drop into the 20s because CPU limitation. As you can see here is 50 frames, and you might say, oh, that's great. Yeah, but as soon as something starts happening, you're going to drop frames, so it's going to be super inconsistent. You can still do it if you want to, but it's going to feel inconsistent. Okay, enemies are about to show up. Hello there, good sir. So enemies show up and I drop into the 30s. So again, feels inconsistent. You can do it if you want to, but I don't think it's a great experience, at least in my opinion. Somebody else. Hello, sir. Okay. There, I drop into the mid-20s. CPU limitation there. There we go. Dead, reduced to atoms. Alright. Let me now show you lowest settings with FSR. Again, this happens on the menu only, those drops. So let's try getting 40 FPS. Again, not going to happen, but I must show you. So for that, we're doing variable rate shading plus dynamic resolution at 100%. That means 60 FPS. Fidelity effects on ultra performance, so it's going to look dreadful, basically, because it's 1/16 of the native resolution. Oh, Jesus. And let's go for lowest settings. So low, 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 low. I don't know why it breaks like that. I think it's the the variable rate shading breaking in the menu. So variable rate shading, ultra performance FSR, and let's lock it to 40 FPS. Oh yeah, there's no 40 FPS. I forgot that when I'm connected to the capture card, that doesn't work. So absolute lowest settings with ultra performance FSR, which looks super blurry. It's basically unplayable in my opinion with ultra performance. So let's see if it can maintain 40 FPS. So yeah, it's smoother, but like this it looks terrible. I mean, it's visually, I have to squint sometimes. Okay, time for the necromorphs to show up. Right behind me. I can barely see. And I'm still getting stutters. So as you can see there, it says over 40 in this area. But I wouldn't play like this. It's so blurry. Even for Steam Deck screen standards, it's way too blurry. I need to drop below 40 there. And we're at 1/16 of the resolution. So the game looks terrible. It's on the lowest settings. It's very pixelated. I can barely read text on screen. And it still drops below 40. So they're basically, in this case, GPU and CPU limited. Both. Oh, and before I go, I forgot to mention something. Despite the shaders being precompiled by Valve, there's still some areas where it stutters. On the desktop PC version also happens. That the issue is that the game still compiles something in the background. Here I'm using the recommended settings I showed you at the second part of the video, 600p. So most of the time it's okay, but there's still some stutters due to shader compilation. So keep that in mind. I screwed up there. There we go. So yeah, a bummer. Hopefully with the patch they fix it up and allow you to compile more stuff. But as of right now, this is what we have. Again, playable on the Steam Deck. Some areas are CPU bound, which is a bummer. But otherwise, most of the time we're at 30 frames with the settings that I showed you. So yeah, just target 30 FPS with the settings that I showed you, and you should be good to go. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks again to EA for providing a code of the game, and I'll see ya next time. Bye guys, thanks for watching.